hopefully you've seen a photograph of the shawl. I had it on the blocking boards, so it was all stretched out and the key pattern around the border was showing nicely. I can't show you the actual shawl because I gave it to a friend. I have a habit of knitting Lucy Haig's shawls and giving them away because there's a limit to how many shawls one person wants. So the first thing you need to consider when, if you buy a knitting pattern, it tells you what wool to use, and the person who designed the garment chose the wool to be appropriate for that garment. But if you are starting from scratch, you have to design the wool yourself. So the first thing to consider is, what do I want to make? And just to briefly recap, last week I showed you a very coarse, hairy mountain breed sheep. I have here some more of a similar kind of fleece. You can see that that's quite thick, it's chunky. You can probably see the little hairs that are hanging off it. There's a lot of coarse fibers in this fleece. This would make, basically, it's carpet. You know, if you're into pegloom weaving of rugs, you just wrap the yarn backwards and forwards around the pegs. So it needs to be very hard wearing and it needs to be quite thick. That means it's got quite a lot of twist in that yarn. A thicker yarn generally needs less twist. The other yarn I showed you is this one. I actually spun and plied a bit of this. This is a much softer fleece. It's something that you could wear next to your skin. I've spun it quite fine because these days I tend to knit fine garments rather than chunkier ones and wear lots of layers. So this one's got less twist because I want it to be softer. So if a typical jumper yarn would have a medium amount of twist as opposed to a very high level of twist for carpets or outerwear or slippers or something like that. What I'm going to show you, this is a yarn that I was playing around with some colours one day, and I made a bit of it was the cerise colour and a bit of it was the green colour, and a bit of it I'd plied both colours together. So this is a marled yarn, and this is about 3 to 4 twists per inch, which means it's medium hard wearing for the thickness of yarn that it is. Now what I'm going to do is twist the yarn at one end between my thumb and finger, and hopefully you'll see that the yarn gets tighter and more twisted. So it's pulling in, and the differences between the two colours they're much closer together, and that yarn's got a lot more twist in it. If you do this yourself with a piece of wool and feel the difference, you'll feel that it gets more dense and tighter. If I move to another section and roll my thumb and finger the other way, you can see that it's getting much looser, much less twist. So you have to consider the properties of the yarn that you want before you start to spin. And for scarves and shawls in particular, you want a yarn that has a lot of drape, a lot of softness, and you want a more luxury fibre. So, you can buy yarns that are 50% merino, 50% silk, and they are really lovely yarns for scarves, shawls, underlayers that you're going to wear next to your skin. Merino is the finest sheep wool, and that's why it tends to be a bit more expensive. It tends to have a bit of a cachet. If something says it's wool, it's almost certainly not merino. If it says it's merino, then you're paying extra because you know that it is merino. So I couldn't find my book of Lucy Haig shawls, but for those of you that have the book or are interested in the book, the shawl I'm talking about is the Caradal pattern. It's don't know why my camera's gone so black all of a sudden. It's the first one in the book, and it's in the book, it's a striped body and a solid coloured border. I made a mini version of the shawl because I was sampling the colours, which is another thing you can do. You can spin a very small amount and then see how it looks. So if I just show you the top bit, it's a better contrast because there's a lot more yellow in that bit. In this shawl, the interest is in the border, which is obviously the Celtic knotwork. The rest, the body is there to carry the border. Some of the shawls are all patterned and they are really beautiful. But so I started by designing the border yarn, and I wanted it to be bright, light, not too much color variation, and I wanted it to be lustrous, so I put quite a high proportion of silk in it. I started off using this picture, which you can't really see very well. It's a glossy photo, it's shiny. This is a painting that I bought on holiday in Ibiza a few years ago. And there are 5 basic colours in that picture. So I got 5 different colours of merino, yellow, green, blue, brown, and a slightly off-white vanilla sort of a colour. So they're all commercially prepared and commercially dyed, ready to spin merino. And then the silk that I decided to make the border yarn 50% silk. But because this idea to use these colours came from Ibiza, which is all beautiful sun, and we're by the beach. We were not clubbing, I hasten to point out, but we were on Ibiza. The sun sparkling, catching the waves, really, really beautiful. There's another wonderful fibre that you can use if you're a spinner called Angelina. And here is a little bit of green Angelino. I don't know if you can focus on that, but I'm sure you can see that as I move it around, it sparkles and it's quite dazzling. It catches the light beautifully. So they were my starting point, the 5 colours, the silk, which I used a high proportion of yellow silk. I found a silk that was identical in colour to the yellow of the merino. I used it all in the shawl, so I don't have any of that left. Now, the shawls are basically fingering. The body of the shawl is stocking stitch, and the border of that particular shawl is the Celtic patterns. The cabling is done on a garter stitch background, and the 2 yarns are slightly different weight, and I was puzzled as to why the border yarn is slightly finer than the yarns in the body. And that's because the garter stitch makes a slightly denser fabric than stocking stitch, which I think really shows the detail that Lucy puts into her work. If she'd used the same thickness of yarn, the border would have come out to be a slightly denser fabric than the body, because she's changed from stocking stitch to garter stitch. So I found that really interesting. So I got all these fibers together and blended them. And just so that I'm not talking all the time, I'm going to give you a little demonstration of how to blend different fibers. I'll just have to come around and re-angle the camera so you can see. I mentioned last week that you don't need a lot of equipment to spin, but we do have some very nice toys. And this is one of them. This is a blending hackle, and it's a rather fearsome piece of kit. It's basically got 6-inch long spikes, 2 rows. They're incredibly sharp and pointy. So it has a guard, which is always on unless you're actually putting the fibre on the hackle. That's a bit big just for a demonstration. You can blend about 200 grams in one go on that one. But we've also got smaller ones. So what I'm just going to show you briefly is I already started this, so I wouldn't take too much time over the demo. I've got the various bits of the merino colours. So all you do, you take off the cover. These nails, points, spikes are much shorter, but they're no less sharp. So this is a serious piece of kit. You can hurt yourself if you're not careful. So you pick up the fibre, you hold the tip, put the very half an inch, say, over the spike, and then just tease the tail off. And you've left a small section of that behind. So you just build it up. I was not trying to put these colours on in any particular order. I just wanted them as they came. So all I'm doing is just putting on whichever colour comes to hand. So we'll have a bit more of the yellow. Whoops. If you let go of it, you'll pull the whole thing straight through. I hope you can see what I'm doing and I'm not blocking the camera. And then I don't have any yellow silk, but I have a bit of turquoise silk. I'll just show you putting the silk. You can, again, put the silk on in columns, but I tend to switch to rows when I'm working with the silk. So if you imagine the full hackle, if you put it on in columns, you'd have a whole chunk in the middle that had no silk. So whenever I switch to silk, I put in a layer and then the silk gets mixed in with all the colours. Go back to the wool, put a bit more merino, a bit of yellow, a bit of green. Now let's have a bit of Angelina, because I love sparkle. I love this stuff. It's one of my favourite fibres to add into a yarn. And you can get it in all sorts of colours, gold, silver, bronze, all the rainbow colours, white. Sometimes you can get it so that if the light catches it one way, it's one colour. The light catches it another way, it's the other colour. So I'm aware of the time. I'm going to stop there, put the guard back on. And then to turn this into something that you can spin, we have this thing called a diz, which is basically, you could use a plastic top off an orange juice bottle and make a little hole in it. So what I'm going to do is just pick a little bit of the fibre, give it a bit of a twist. I'm doubling it back on itself so I can actually thread it through this hole. You tend to use a hole of the size that you want the finished yarn to be. And technically, I should have used this tiny 1 millimeter hole, but it's really, really hard to get the fibre through that hole. So I'm just going to show you what happens when I use the next size up. You let the diz, sorry, I need to move my hand. You let the diz hang free on the bit of fibre you've teased out, and then you work your way backwards and forwards down the stack that you've built up, pulling a bit of the fibre. It's a sort of a hand over hand motion. You slide the diz up, pull a bit, slide the diz, pull, slide the diz, pull, and so on. And when I get to the end, I'll show you that I've now got a nice long string of beautifully multicolored fibre that has come off the diz. You can see you tend to wrap these around your hand so they don't tangle into a little nest. And there you can see the stripes of the different colours. And then when you spin that, because I'm looking for a fine yarn, the body yarn was around 380 meters per 100 grams equivalent. This is what you end up with. This is the yarn that I used for the body, which was those 5 colours blended exactly like that with the silk and the Angelina. And then for the border, I left out the green and the blue. I seriously cut down the amount of brown and the amount of white, but they did tone nicely with the yellow. So I did keep a bit of that in, and it's about 50% silk. I did exactly the same thing. It's maybe 3 bits of yellow, 1 bit of brown, 2 bits of yellow, 1 bit of white, rather than working evenly. But it was just exactly the same process, built it up on the hackle, exactly the same. And this is the yarn that I came up with. You can see there's a little bit of brown in there. I don't know if you can see the sparkle. You might get a little glint as I turn it around as the sun catches it. We're fortunate that it's sunny today. So this one, because this was the border yarn, the garter stitch, that wanted to be finer, there's about 420 yards per 100 grams in this one, which is basically fingering. And, you know, that's the sort of commercially spun yarn that you would buy for a shawl of that nature. And then I knitted it. So because, yeah, twist, this is much finer than the carpet yarn that I showed you. It's quite a bit finer than the knitting yarn that I showed you. It's got less twist than both. Generally, the finer the yarn, the more twist it has to hold it together. But because this is to be a very soft yarn with a lot of drape, it's got far less twist. So if you remember last week, when I was actually demonstrating the spinning, every time the big wheel went round, the little wheel went round a certain number of times, it means that you feed more fibre to the wheel to get less twist than you would if you wanted more twist in the yarn. You give it less fibre so that all the twist is going into a short distance of yarn. If you want less twist, you have to give it more fibre, and that shares the twist for each treadle. Each time the big wheel turns round, it shares the twist amongst a longer section of the yarn. So that is basically how you spin a tight twisty yarn or a soft, loosely spun, soft spun yarn. And then you have the delight of going off and knitting your shawl. So has anybody got any questions?
I'll just pop in and say thank you ever so much. That was really, really interesting. The one thing that we forgot to say right at the beginning was to explain why you're talking about a Lucy Haig shawl. So for those who are new, I'll just say that as part of this Celtic Knit Along project, it's part of a much bigger project to do with the George Bain collection that Groam House Museum has. And to we've got these 4 knit along sessions, and then on Thursday, and do book a ticket if you fancy it, we've actually got Lucy Haig, who is a very well known knitwear designer, but she creates designs using Celtic patterns and has been heavily influenced by the work of George Bain and the way in which he has tried to explain how you create knotwork and interlace and and pattern. And Lucy has adapted those and creates these amazingly complex patterns, often based on Pictish symbol stones, Pictish early Christian stones, which occur in this area as well. So it's very much looking at where does the wool come from, how do you spin it, which is what Sue covered last week, and then what the different ways in which you create the wool that you're going to knit with, depending on what you're going to make. So the Toorie Bunnet is made in a much is made in a much, I'll call it as a pleb, I'll call it a much thicker wool, and in a way it's because it doesn't need to be as fine as Sue has just explained for the shawl. But Lucy Haig will be talking about how she goes about creating design from Celtic patterns on Thursday night at 7:30 if you'd like to join us. But my question for Sue is, so when you're spinning, your consideration every time you, even before you gather the wool ready to spin, is what am I going to be using it for? Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. You have to know what you're going to make. I mean, if you're just spinning because you want to spin,
yeah,
you can make something and then put it in your stash, and eventually you'll find a use for it. But if you want the item, you know what you want before you start, then you consider the purpose, what properties you want that to have, therefore what fibers are suitable. If you wanted it to be, say, not terribly thick, but underlayer, but you wanted it to be warm, you might choose to blend alpaca in with the wool, or you might choose to put in a bit of silk. They all have different thermal properties. If you wanted summer wear, just, you know, like a little tank top or something, you might choose to spin it out of cotton and not even use wool at all. Or then there are the artificial fibers like bamboo. Bamboo's a lovely, cool fiber. You can get bamboo in fiber form, so you can spin your own bamboo yarns, for instance. So the first thing is always, what am I going to use it for? What properties do I want it to have? And then you design the yarn accordingly, and then you can then follow a traditional pattern, or you can make your own pattern up.
So, can I ask Barb? I'll take another, if you don't mind. I'll take another question, which is really for Barbara and Julie. So, how did you come up with the wool that goes with the Toorie Bunnet kit then?
Well, luckily on Julie's website, she already had in her shop mini skeins of the thickness of wool that I needed to make the hat pattern. First of all, I took George Bain's charted pattern. I explained last week that he charted his pattern, or in the first Zoom, he charted his patterns on a square graph paper, which is great if you're knitting with very fine wool, but not if you want to knit with a thicker wool. And I thought, well, being a hat, we're something quick and easy to knit up, we want a fairly thick wool. So I had to rechart some of it to take into account the fact that knitting stitches aren't actually square. They are, in fact, rectangular. Now this is an even thicker wool. And I don't know if you can see on this if I hold it up. Try and get close enough, and you compare at your own knitting as well, but each stitch on here, if you focus at the white ones, it's actually wider than it is high. If you look at some of those little white V's, you can probably see that each stitch is wider than it is high, which means when you chart a knitting pattern for a thicker wool than fingering, you need to use a particular rectangular ratio. There are two different ratios of rectangular graph paper for knitters, one for things like light worsted, double knit, and then another slightly different ratio for anything thicker than that. Well, having worked out that the best wool to knit this particular pattern on would be double knit, I had a look at Julie's yarns and went through her shop, and there amongst her shop items were these lovely little mini skeins of undyed local natural wool, which is mixed with alpaca, so it's nice and soft. And I thought, right, they're just the right size, 35 grams each little skein. That's the wool I'm going to use, basically. But it all started with what sort of wool, again, as Sue said, when you're considering what to use, you will have to first work out how you want to wear it, what you want it for. I have knitted hats in a 4-ply or fingering yarn, and they're very lightweight. They're ideal for something like a chemo hat or a lightweight lacy summer little hat. But to keep the wind out, especially the Scottish wind and the rain we've been having lately, you do need a thicker yarn and something like a natural wool, which will just shake off the rain. And that's the beauty of wool. It will keep you warm, shake off the rain. But if you need, it won't overheat you, being wool. It has these wonderful properties of not overheating, unlike a lot of the acrylic fibres. So that's how the hat came about. This, the bigger one, I just showed this to some of the girls before we started recording. I've made this one in an Aran wool on bigger needles. This is to fit my husband. Exactly the same pattern, just using size up needles and a thicker yarn because he's got a very big head. Just going back to Sue's talk, I have actually my copy of Lucy Haig's shawl book here with the pattern in that Sue was talking about. This is, I've got all of Lucy Haig's books. I love her shawls. This is the book, Celtic. Now that's probably coming up back to front on your screen, isn't it? But it says Celtic cable shawls. Yeah. This, I believe, is the shawl you were talking about, Sue.
That's right.
And below this is
Lucy's shawl.
Yeah, this is the carved stone.
All the striped. Yeah, but I couldn't pick subsets of the colours to get stripes that worked.
Yeah.
So I made the body of mine solid.
Yeah, but this is the sort of pattern of the school. And this below is the stone, the carved Celtic or Pictish stone, I'm not sure which, that she used for the inspiration. You can see the key patterns on the base of the stone are reflected in the border of the shawl. Lucy, so these, I must say, this particular book, Celtic Cable Shawls, is one of the easier of Lucy's books. She does some amazing patterns, absolutely amazing. Her talk will be incredibly interesting. I've actually been to one of her talks in person. And she's a very engaging talker. And it really gives you the idea of where she gets her inspiration and how she translates that to things like this. Another one of her shawls.
And Diana is showing us one of Lucy's other books.
Diana has the Illuminated Knits book, which I also have, which is a very much more intricate pattern work, which even I haven't attempted yet. One day.
May, were you wanting to ask a question?
May, unmute yourself, May. Oh, no, you've gone back on again. That's it.
No. After all that, no.
All that just to say no. It's a bit like going to an auction and having to refrain from putting a hand in your hair or scratching a nose or something. Shall we go back onto the last bit of our Bunnet then?
Before you do, Julie was going to say something.
Yes, I was just going to say Julie wants to say.
Oh, okay, yes, please.
I just wanted to ask Sue if you have a particular, if you had.
Can't hear you, Julie. Where are you?
You're a bit quiet.
Is that better?
Slightly.
No, you're still very quiet.
That's strange.
Oh, that's it. We can see you now as well.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yes. I just wanted to ask Sue if she had to pick one particular fibre as a favourite, what would that be?
Silk, I think.
Silk.
I love spinning silk. There are so many different forms that silk comes in, and its properties are wonderful. It's a beautiful fibre. The only thing is, you can't spin silk if your hands are chapped. because it sticks. They're so light and floaty. If you've got dry skin, the silk just sticks to it. But I absolutely love spinning silk.
I can imagine it'd be great to work with.
It is. It's a lovely fibre.
Thank you.
That's why I tended to put a lot of silk in the more luxury yarns that I'm spinning. It blends nicely with anything. I made a continuous loop scarf with silk, alpaca and cashmere, and that was a real challenge because those fibres are so very, very different to each other. But it's a beautiful fibre. It's a lovely yarn, and the fabric it made is gorgeous to wear.
Yeah, I can imagine. And the silk, adding silk into anything, it then catches the light and gives a real depth of colour, I should imagine.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm holding off trying spinning until I have more time on my hands. One day I'm hoping I will, and then I'd love to learn to spin, but I suspect it's very addictive. So
it is
so far.
Yes, but the good thing is you can pick it up for 10 minutes. So, you know, if you're just having a little break, you can sit down and spin for 10 minutes. You don't have to devote long stretches of time. In fact, when you're learning to spin, it's better to spin for 10 or 15 minutes a day than to spin for 2 hours once a week.
Yes, I can imagine. So you just go gradually, gently.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll get there.
Good. I strongly recommend it.
I thought you might. Thank you.
Okay, shall I take over now? And hopefully a lot of you will be fairly well along with your Bunnets now, except perhaps the new people who've joined us. And I have just this week been sending out some more kits. And every day on Ravelry, I'm getting notifications of more people buying the pattern, which is great because we've now made roughly about £250 for the museum funds. This is apart from the kits that are actually going into the museum shop, the first batch of which went down to the museum yesterday, because the museum will be opening on weekends from this weekend. If you're up in the area, if you're up in the Highlands and you'd like to visit Groam House Museum, pop along to their website where you'll be able to book a ticket. It will be one family or bubbled group per visit, a timed visit, so you've no worries about bumping into people and health and safety issues. This is why we're only opening up weekends at the moment. We're trying to get all our volunteers to have had both sets of their injections before we open fully. And it's a way of us controlling the number of people going in and out. Should you be up this way during the summer, you'll probably find a couple of us sitting knitting in the lovely sunny courtyard outside the museum. I certainly shall. It's about 2 minutes walk from my house, so I'll make a point of going down there a few times during the week, particularly at weekends. But we hope to see some of you up around here once everybody starts moving around. Right, if we go back to the Bunnet, I'm at the point on this big one now where I am starting to narrow down and cast off for the top of the hat. So I've done all my knit two togethers, and I thought I'd stop here just for the moment, because I know for a few of you, this is the first time you've been using circular needles. A lot of you will be used to using double pointed needles for something knitted in the round. And I did have one query messaged through to me saying, how on earth do I do a small lot of stitches on a 60 centimetre long circular needle? So I thought I'd stop here and just show you. Now, I don't know whether this will work, but I'm going to try and go around behind the camera so you can see this. You can see my hands in real time, as it were. So bear with me 1 second. I should have done this while Sue was talking, actually. Get them over here without knocking the camera all over the place. Oops. There's it.
Thank you.
Let's see. If this doesn't work, I'll come back round your side. Okay. Now, I'm going to have to hang upside down here and try and do this. Right. Now, I can't see myself full screen at the moment, only on the little bit. Yeah.
Lift your hands very slightly. Yep.
Is that better?
Yes, that's great.
Right.
Thank you.
So I've got half of my stitches on the front needle. Then I've got a loop here with the cord, and the other half of the stitches at the back of the work with another loop of cord leading up to the right hand needle. So I've effectively got 2 very short needles worth with the live stitches on. Should put my reading glasses on for this. Oops, where are we? No, that's the bottom.
Up a
Oh,
bit.
I'm trying to go the wrong
That's it.
way.
That's it.
Next time we do one of these, I'm going to get another camera so I can have it over my shoulder. But anyway, so all you've got to do is to split the number of stitches you're working on in half. And in your mind's eye, just pretend they're on 2 separate needles. I've taken this down to the point where I need to knit each pair of stitches together.
Move your hand to the left.
Hands to my left.
Your left, yes. That's and up a bit.
Up a bit. There we go.
That's better.
Now all I've got to do is keep them there. Well, I'll do a couple of stitches. I won't do the whole lot. So I'm going to knit just as, now I knit continental in probably what you think is a rather peculiar way, because I have these very arthritic hands. So with my right hand needle, I am going to go and knit 2 together. Oh, this really isn't going to work, I don't think. But I'm knitting 2 together in the normal manner and sliding off.
Left a bit.
Back a bit, down a bit. This is like that game show that used to be on with Bernie and the Arrow, isn't it? Bernie the bolt, up a bit, down a bit. Anyway, as you can see, I'm working on 2 needles still. I'm going to ignore the ones at the back of my work until I get to the last of these stitches. Then I'm going to pull the front needle forward, pull it round a bit, and put the next lot of stitches onto the front needle. So I'm working effectively on 1 small batch of stitches at a time. So rather than trying to work like this, which is all the needles going round in a very tight circle, if you split them into 2 equal, or it doesn't need to be equal, into 2 portions, work on the first set of stitches first till they're all over on your right hand needle, then pull round the second set of stitches onto your left hand needle. It makes life a lot easier. You don't give yourself cramp in the hands and you'll get a much neater finish. And that will enable you to go down to, well, we need to go down to 9 stitches to finish off this hat. But I have taken it down to smaller than that on a circular needle. When you get down to the last 9 stitches, you'll have a nice little tight circle. Cut off your yarn at that sort of length, 6 inches or so. Pop the end onto a thick-eyed needle, tapestry needle or a wool needle, or you could always do it with a crochet hook, 1 stitch at a time. You take the yarn from where you finish knitting, just pull the stitch off there, I'll pick it up in a minute, and you want to thread it through as though you were still knitting along, but instead of knitting it, you thread the yarn through the stitches that are left on your needle, which will, when you get to the end, will enable you to pull it tight and make a nice tight knot in the middle. Then you just take your thread through to the wrong side, give it a few stitches to finish it off, and you'll have a nice tight little circle You'll be amazed how tight 9 stitches will go once you've pulled them all through. And then what I like to do, once I've made my bobble, a Toorie, as I did with this one, I find that bobbles sometime on the top of a hat will kind of flop over like that, or just overbalance the hat. So what I like to do is to sew a button on the inside. This button's a little bit big. It's a bit heavy. It's made of leather. It's a local craft one, but it's all I could find. So once you sew your bobbin on, your bobble on, take it through the hat, through the button, back out, through the bobble, through the hat, through the button a few times. You'll get a nice secure fixing. It also means that if you give it to somebody who really hates bobbles, all they've got to do is to cut through those stitches there and the bobble will fall off. This one I did by making a bobble and sewing it on. I did a lovely blue and cream hat onto which I put a commercially purchased furry bobble, which actually had a little loop of elastic sewn onto the bottom. So what I did there was to sew the button inside with a crochet hook, pull the little loop of elastic through and loop it over the button. Again, it means that if you're knitting for a hardened teenager who wouldn't be seen dead in a bobble, all they've got to do is pop the loop off and off goes your bobble. So having finished your hat, got it all nicely sewn up. Oh, and I do this part before you put the bubble on. Before you get around to putting your bobble on, I would recommend, even though this is quite a small project, that you wash your hat. Well, not so much wash as just give it a gentle swill in cold water. When you're knitting, you're continually pulling at the yarn to wind it round things. You're bunching it up in your hands. You've got all the oils and greases on your hands. If you pop it in a bowl of cold water or cool water, oh, we've got Barbara and Richard now. Shall I let them in, Jenny, or have you?
I've let them in, yeah.
Lovely.
Yes, not speaking to me because she didn't get the link for some reason.
Okay.
Sorry, Barbara.
That's okay. No problem. Yes, so I would always advise washing something when you've finished with it, because you'll be amazed how much difference it makes. It will loosen up the wool fibres slightly. You'll get a softer feel to it. And if you can see on this big one, the pattern is a bit bumpy. It's not quite flat. It's kind of a little ridged here and there. A little soak in cool water will allow the fibres to relax and give you a much better finish to your hat. You want to use cool water. Never put wool or a natural fibre in the washing machine. You will end up with a hat to fit a chihuahua. I use cool water and something like Wool Light or Eucalyptus, or a very, very mild detergent, like a baby detergent or something. Just lay it flat in the bowl, give it a few squeezes like you're a cat kneading over it. Don't pick it up and rub it, because if you pick it up and rub it, all the little hairy bits of the wool, the fibres, will knit together. And again, you'll end up with a felted hat. Now, felted hats are very nice. And if you knit a giant size hat and felt it in hot water and rubbing, you will get probably what is more akin to the original Bunnets that were worn back by the labourers in the Highlands of Scotland. They were knitted of homespun wool, and they were felted to keep out the rain and the wind. The Bunnet worn by Tam O'Shanter in his famous ride was a felted Bunnet dyed with woad of homespun wool. but we don't want to felt our hats unless you particularly want it. Felting actually is very good if you want to make a bag. It makes a very strong material, but you need a lot more knitting than you want to end up with. There are lots of bits on YouTube and knitting channels about how to go about felting. There are various different methods according to what sort of fibre you're using. But for our purposes, we want a nice gentle dunk in some cool water just to relax the fibres. As I say, I like to put a little bit of wool light in or eucalyptus, depending on what I've got in, and then give it a quick rinse. And the method for getting the water out of your hat, once you've got it nice and sopping wet, is to get a towel, bath towel or a hand towel, lay your hat flat on the towel, and then roll up the towel with the hat inside. You can imagine there's a towel. I should have brought a towel in. This is now rolled up with layers of towel in between it. The next thing you have to do is put it on the floor and walk on it. Because the weight of your body will squeeze the water from the hat into the towel, and you'll be amazed how much water comes out. Now, you can either then lay your hat somewhere flat to dry. If you're going to do that, I'd recommend every couple of hours or so, turn it round a little bit, because if you lay it flat to dry, you're liable to get a crease down one side. I've got a polystyrene head that I like to put my hats on to dry, but you can always use a kiddie's balloon, blown up to head size. Balloons make excellent hat blockers. Just don't try and pin your hat on. Please don't pin your hat onto a balloon. Hats won't need pinning. Bigger garments, I thought I'd wear this today. Being somewhat of a mini skein addict, I made this jumper from about 12 different colours of mini skein in this. I knitted this last summer. It's all in one, no seams. This I laid flat on the bed, and I went round pinning it to the duvet with some long dressmaker's pins. Will do fine. You can buy blocking boards, which are just foam boards really. They're a bit like the jigsaw puzzle mats you'd buy for a kiddie to play on. The jigsaw mats from one of the cheap pound stores are a lot more inexpensive than the proper ones you buy from knitting stores, but they work just as well. With something like a jumper, you need really to, once it's washed, it's going to be very floppy and baggy. You need to pat it back into the shape you want it to be. And then just leave it overnight or so, depending how big the garment is. It takes, I can tell you from experience, if you're knitting a West knit shawl, you'll need at least a double bed, if not a king size one, because that has 500 stitches in it. Your hat won't take up that much room. But you will be amazed once it's washed how nice it feels. I mean, this wool of Julie's is lovely to handle anyway. But you'll be amazed how the water won't go dirty, but you will get a slight sense of the oils that are on your hands, or if like me, you have a tendency to drop it on the floor or the dog jumps on it or something. You'll be amazed just how you get a little grimy scum off of it, shall we say. And it will make the stitches lay flatter. So you will get, instead of the slightly bumpy effect of the dark coloured hat, you will get a nice smooth effect, and it looks much nicer once you're wearing it. So that's that. I wouldn't wash the pom-pom. I'm not very good at pom-poms. Mine have a tendency to fall to pieces for some reason. I must practice them more. I'm more of a buy a furry pom-pom from Amazon type, to be quite honest. But I hope you'll have all be well on the way to finishing your hats. Somebody's just asked on chat if I have any tips for making pom-poms. Yes, buy them from Amazon.
Actually,
And if you go onto YouTube, I'm sure there are videos on YouTube on how to make a nice tight pom-pom. I tend to wind them around. The traditional way is to get 2 polo mint shaped circles of cardboard. So you've got a circle with a circle hole in the middle, and you wind your yarn around and around and around, cut round between the 2 pieces of cardboard and tie it together. I've never find I can tie it tight enough to then stop all the strands falling out again. For this particular bobble, which isn't too bad actually, I wind it around a credit card. And once I'd finished winding it, could be a bit fuller actually, and it's probably a bit long, but I wound the wool around a credit card so it would kind of look like that, around the credit card in the middle. I snipped a bit, sewed over the bottom with the yarn to hold those stitches together, snipped a few more, sewed a bit more, snipped a bit more, sewed a bit more. So instead of having one yarn through the middle of the pom-pom trying to tie it all tight together, I had a row of stitches, which made my pom-pom rather flat to start with. So then I sewed around the bottom in a circle to make it into more of a round shape. This at the moment is holding okay. If my cat gets hold of it, I dread to think what will happen to it, but at the moment that's holding on. I've never been a great bobble maker. You can get little gadgets for making pom-poms. They look like Cornish pastry clamps. I don't know if you've ever seen. Our American Canadian viewers probably won't have seen a Cornish pasty, let alone a Cornish pasty clamp, but they're a sort of two-piece plastic affair that goes like that. Now, how you get a pom-pom out of that?
Barbara, Celia's showing one.
Oh, have you got one, Celia? Say something and then you'll come up on the screen. Yes. Say a few words, Celia. Oh, there we go. Brilliant.
As you say, they're plastic. You get 2, and you put them together while they're open like that. You wind your wool round both sides, then you clip them together, cut in the middle, and hey presto.
Oh, wonderful.
And you get a kit with different sizes, and they're a lot easier and a lot quicker, so I could recommend them.
Right, I should look for those. I noticed we've got quite a few messages on chat.
Hobbycraft.
Oh, that's from Hobbycraft. Brilliant. Hobbycraft for our people over the pond is a big crafting store over here. I can't remember the name of the one that's in the States, although I did used to go to it a lot when we were visiting. Can't think of the name, it will come to me, but a big crafting store will have them. Or your local yarn store might have now. Local yarn stores are allowed to open again. What else have we got? We've had a lot
I think Margaret was trying to show her knitting.
Oh, good, Margaret.
That is great, yeah.
I worked on it today and I was really pleased with myself. This is my 3rd attempt until I looked at the end and I'd gone wrong on the 3rd needle.
Oh dear.
So it's got to come out again, but it doesn't. It won't be the whole of it that comes out.
Good. You can't really call yourself a knitter until you've undone something at least 3 times, I think. Oh, and Julie says she often dries over a balloon or an upturned bowl propped up on a very tall glass. That's another good tip for drying your hat. Something like Pyrex bowl. And Liz says she's measured the head to fit, then use scrunch newspaper to stuff in a plastic bag. Another good tip. Where are we? And and Julie also says you can buy inexpensive pom-pom maker tools that work very well.
Can I interrupt just for a minute? Yeah. There's a shop in Tomnahurry Street called the Woolly Sheep, And they've just opened last year, and she stocks the faux fur pom-poms, and she has a big range of colours.
Right.
So if anybody doesn't want to make one of their own, they can always go there.
Yes, I think most yarn stores will keep a stock of pom-poms in.
Yeah.
Even we have a little, it's kind of like an old-fashioned department store, and it sells shoes and clothes and other knickknacks. It's in Dingwall, but they also have a very good range of wools. And I noticed in there they'd got some pom-poms that you could buy actually individually,
right.
As well. But the most of the big selling sites, Amazon, eBay, you'll find big. I tend to buy my pom-poms in big bags because I tend to knit a lot of hats. So I've got all sorts of multicoloured ones.
Barbara, can we have a show and tell of the knitting that people are doing at the moment?
Yes. Who wants to show us their hats or hats in progress? Oh, May, that looks lovely.
Yeah.
Oh, very nice. That comes out very well.
Well, it actually looks red, but it's actually more copper.
Oh, right.
And a copper colour.
Lovely.
And I'm now, all I have to do is to finish it off because I've got my 9 stitches left. I can't get the hang of, like the loop there.
Right,
so
yeah.
Once it gets a wee bit tight, I just go on to 4 needles.
Yes, yeah. I must admit,
much easier.
Yeah.
So,
4 needles is easier. It's just I'm so used to knitting on circulars, but you've made a very good job of that.
Yeah, I was really pleased how quickly it knitted up.
Yeah.
I think I've been knitting quite a lot with finer wool, so it felt really thick.
Yeah.
It's just plain double knitting, but it does need blocked, because it is a wee bit tight.
Yeah.
So I'll get it finished off.
I'm going to ask Julie a question here if she's still with us. Something like the copper colour, when you put it into cool water, you might find it runs slightly. Some yarn colours with a red base do leak a tiny bit. Now, is Julie still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Lovely. I did read a tip somewhere that says if you put a tiny bit of vinegar in the water, it helps to stop dyes running. Have you heard of that?
I think so. Sorry, May. I think if it's acid dyed, then that's correct. And a lot of synthetic dyes will be acid dyed. I've never dyed with a synthetic dye, so I'm not an expert. If it's naturally dyed, I would, and it's leaking a wee bit, I would just rinse it. But hopefully it should have been well rinsed before you buy it, so it shouldn't. Although if it's indigo dyed, it will crop and rub off a little bit on your hands, and that there's not much you can do about that. It's just like your indigo jeans for the first couple of wears. But I think red dyes are more prone to leaking than other colours when they're artificial dyes.
Right.
But I'm not sure. It must just be something to do with the pigments in it. I'm not sure.
If you've got a wee bit of the yarn left,
I've got
put a little bit of it in some lukewarm water, and then you'll see if it's going to be prone to running slightly. And if it is, give it a quick dip and then pull it out. I did buy some commercially produced yarn a couple of years ago to knit a red and white shawl for a baby in Canada with maple leaves on. Red, white and blue, Toronto Blue Jays, with maple leaves and the Toronto Blue Jay logo on. And it was from a reputable company. Wool knitted up beautifully, but as soon as I dropped it into water, I had pink, blue and red blanket, which was a bit of a shock, but you can get dye remover sheets. So I rinsed it again with one of those, and luckily the white turned slightly off-white, but it took most of the loose dye out. But had I thought to put the red in some water first, I wouldn't have soaked it so long.
Yeah, well, my late mother-in-law used to always say to stop colours running, put a tablespoon of salt in the water.
Ah, right.
And it sets the colour.
Ah, that's a useful tip.
So, Yeah, but I mean, this is just wool that I had lying about, and it's just acrylic wool. It's not like pure wool or anything. So I will try a wee bit just to make sure. But I think
it's less likely to then.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does tend to be
I'm just so desperate to get started.
A lot of people have been like that, you know, itching to get going.
So Barbara, both the other Barbara and Denise have got their hats up as well.
Oh, wonderful. Let's have them up on screen then. Say a few words and then your face will appear before us. Barbara?
Go on then. So I've reversed my colours, Barbara. You won't approve, probably.
Oh, no, it looks lovely.
I really like it. I have leftover and I just need to make my pom-pom.
Yep, lovely. That is more or less the same colour. Oh, no, it's a different sort of colour scheme, but it's, I'm doing a white pom-pom for Paul's one because that's
nice. Left. It's lovely and cosy. It's really lovely. Yes. I love it.
Yeah, the wool is wonderful, isn't it? It just feels like you want to put it on and go out somewhere.
So very nice. Thank you.
Good, good. And Barbara had her lovely double layered hats that she showed us last week.
It was
Barbara,
too
for
big.
those of you who weren't here, there we go.
If you remember, it was too big. So I put it in the washing machine and now it's just the right size.
Oh, wonderful. See, this is what we were saying about wool in a washing machine will shrink.
It's now nice and tight.
Yes, and I should think it's a nice cozy material as well.
It's lovely. It's lovely and warm in the winter.
Yeah, you can also do that in hot water, a bowl of hot water, checking carefully as you do it and agitating your hat if you find it too big. I managed to shrink, I made myself a gilet with cables on a couple of years ago, which turned out enormous. So I put it in the bath with hot water and walked up and down on it for a while and managed to shrink it down a size. And then rinsed it very quickly in cool water once it was at the size that I thought I wanted, before pinning it out and sort of patting it into shape. So it's amazing how flexible natural fibres are. You know, they will let you do things to them.
I did try it by hand to start with, and it didn't seem to change. So I thought I'll just try putting it in the washing machine and see what happens. So it was only on a 30 wash, but nevertheless, it's done the trick. Yeah. And
you've needed it this week as well, haven't you? Or has the weather been kind to you?
No, we needed it.
Oh dear. Right, well, I've just noticed it is now 8:15 and you'll all be wanting to get off to your hot cocoa or hot toddy or what have you. I would like to thank you all for joining in the Zooms. Now, next Tuesday on the Facebook group, I will be putting a post asking you to comment with pictures of your hats, finished hopefully, or almost finished if you've only got a few stitches to go. Everybody who puts a picture of their hat on that post will be placed into a random name generator. A friend of mine's got a lovely one. It's like one of these old-fashioned fairground spinning wheel things. And the person that the random generator picks out will receive a wonderful prize from Julie at Black Isle Yarns, which is a kit to make a lovely cowl in similar colours to those we've been using. So will go very nicely with your bunnet, those of you who've actually got the kit. It's a very, very generous prize from her. So we'll do that. The Facebook group I will leave open if anybody wants to pop on for chatting or asking questions or showing off any other wool they might have bought, or if you buy the Lucy Haig books. If you would, I'd like you to give some feedback on our Zoom sessions. We are thinking about doing another project later on in the autumn, on a similar line to raise funds for the museum. So if there's anything else you would like to see, knitting or embroidery even, crochet we could go into. My sister crochets, I won't do it. But if you've got any other ideas of things that you do, it's nice to have these little get-togethers, especially for this past year or so when we've not really been able to go out for coffee mornings and knit and natters. It's nice to have like-minded people to share ideas with. But if you'd like to pop onto the Facebook group, just leave us some feedback about how we've done for our very, very first knit along Zoom. I know there's been a few technical hitches, but yes.
Ali's got a lovely coloured hat.
Oh, Ali, I didn't.
She nearly showed us.
Trouble is with, I can't, because I'm doing it here, I can't see everybody's faces, but where are you?
It's lovely. It's a beautiful blue.
Oh, I can see it now. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Yes, 2 tones of blue. Very nice.
This used to be the grey that I bought. I bought the kit, but this was my first attempt at circular knitting. And I decided after ripping back the grey wool, the lovely wool all the time, I thought, no, I'm going to go to basic double mix. So I'm quite pleased how it's come out. I'm quite keen now to get started with the nice wool. But I was about to put on there, I really struggled with the top with circular knitting too. And there's a really, really good video on Very Pink, a website, Very Pink. I'm not an expert at it, and I have to say, two rows before the end of my hat, I dropped 3 stitches. I was on holiday at the time and I was cussing, but it's not perfect, but it's okay.
I think you've done very well, very well.
Because of my hat, I'm a dog walker. You know, I walk the dog, and so I can put my hood up too. So I prefer not to have a pom-pom, but I'm going to try the grey one this week, but that's just basic double knit. But I was quite pleased as a first attempt with circular knitting. I was quite pleased. And thank you, Barbara, for all your hints and tips, because I know you've been...
Oh, you're welcome. That's an excellent for your first time on double knit. Yeah, on circular needles. Very good. And thank you for the tip about the Very Pink video. I'll look for that.
She does a few things where you can do more intricate stuff, but I think it's something like you can do get started if you want to cast on circular, but it's just simple magic loop. Magic quite loop, a good video. That's quite good for anybody. I really struggled still with the top, and I think it was good to hear that somebody did 4 needles. I think I'd probably find that easier. I found it very tight at the top, and I think that's why I ended up dropping stitches.
Right.
It was quite, like I say, hopefully I will have started the next one by next week.
Good. Well, I'll leave the post up there for a week. I'll put it on Tuesday, leave it up for a week before we do the draw. Give everybody time to get some pictures up. But as I say, let us know, what sort of things you might like to hear about in future. Do please use the group to pop on and chat to each other. You can still send me messages via the group if you've got any problems. But other than that, enjoy your knitting. Now you started. All those of you that hadn't knitted before or hadn't knitted in the round before, enjoy it. It is addictive.
Thank you for all your help. One thing I would quite like to throw in is socks. Because this is first circular, knitting I've done. Socks is something that I think, that might be quite nice to do.
Socks are good. I would recommend actually to start on mittens first.
Right.
The construction of a mitten is very similar to a sock in that you're knitting a small garment in the round. But with socks, you've got the tricky heel part to do. So if you can get used to knitting something with a small diameter on a finer wool first, you'll find knitting a sock a lot easier. But yes, I mean, in the future, we could always talk socks. But there are as many different ways to knit socks as anything, I suppose. You can knit them from the toe upwards or the cuff downwards. There are about... Oh, somebody's got a phone call. Somebody's saying, for goodness sakes, get off that Zoom. I want my dinner. Yes, that's Paul. Paul's just come back with KFC. So I will bid you all a fond good night.
Good
And,
night.
Can we just say thanks very much to Sue?
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you very much,
interesting
Sue,
talks.
especially for the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. Oh, now Barbara, the other Barbara's just said there's an event called In Stitches at Eden Court on Facebook for Zoom meetings on Tuesdays. Oh, that's the one you go to before you've been coming on here.
That's right. Yeah.
IN, capital IN, Stitches at Eden Court.
It's a group on Facebook as well, but when we can meet at Eden Court, we do. But all through the year, we've been meeting on Zoom at 7 o'clock Tuesday night. And
I have seen people knitting at Eden Court when I've been to concerts, and I've wondered whether it was a local group.
That does.
Oh, well, I must come along and join you one day when they start having concerts again.
Yeah.
Right. So a very good night to everybody. I'll let you all leave at your leisure because Jenny and Jill and I usually have a few words afterwards just to wrap the tape up. I'm going to stop recording now. Bye.